A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We've got a story, by the way, about that security of a free state, an armed citizen saving the lives of children. Deputies in Florida calling him a hero. That's coming up a little bit later on in today's program. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Cam Edwards. It is good to be with you. We've got a deep dive into some of the California litigation that is underway. Chuck Michel, president of the California Rifle and Pistol Association, got to join us in just a little bit for an extensive interview. We're going to talk about more than one case. We're also going to talk about how this New York State Rifle and Pistol Association case could have an impact on California gun laws and, frankly, gun control laws around the country as well. And just a program note, I am actually taping this a little ahead of time. I don't like to do that. I really just like to, do the show, post it as quickly as possible. But I am on my way. Well, not at this moment, but when you're watching, chances are I'll be on my way to Colorado for the Independence Institute's ATF party. Yeah, which is fantastic. This is not thrown by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. It is a party that is put on by the Independence Institute, a fundraiser for that organization, which does great work protecting and defending the Second Amendment, among other rights there in Colorado. But it begins with shooting sporting clays in the morning. That would be the F part of the ATF party. And then in the afternoon, cocktails are enjoyed, cigars are smoked, a good time is had by all, and I'm going to be the keynote speaker there this weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. It's my third time actually participating in the ATF party. I don't know if that is if that's a new record, but I kind of hope it is, and I kind of hope that I'm the record holder. So hopefully I'll get a chance to see you out there. If you are a Colorado gun owner, I would love to get the opportunity to do so. But I do want to let you know that's why today's program is going to be a little bit different, why the interview is going to be a little bit longer, more expansive. I didn't want to give you dated news, stuff that you'd already heard about. So we're going to skip most of the headlines with one exception here, because this is a big one. In Virginia, Michael Bloomberg's Everytown for Gun Safety has begun its campaign ad blitz here. We've got elections coming up in November. Every seat in the state legislature in Virginia is up for grabs this year. And I got to tell you, it's a very closely divided legislature right now. There is, in essence, a 1-vote pro-gun majority in the state Senate. There is a 3-vote pro-gun majority on most bills. Might even be smaller than that on some, in the Virginia State Assembly. And Everytown for Gun Safety, backed by Michael Bloomberg, currently spending about $135,000 on a couple of online ads targeting about a dozen or so Republican lawmakers in the suburban areas of the state. So Northern Virginia, the D.C. suburbs, Fairfax County, Loudoun County. In the Richmond area, you're looking at, some of these suburban counties, Chesterfield County, things of that nature. And then in the Virginia Beach area, they're targeting some lawmakers as well. Virginia Beach, of course, the site of a active assailant attack on May 31st. That prompted Virginia Governor Ralph Northam to call for a special session on gun control. Virginia Republicans said, listen, we're not going to just, ram through a bunch of gun control bills. We're going to take a look at these proposals. We're going to also take a look at other proposals that the governor is not calling for. And so this week, we had the Virginia Crime Commission on yesterday's Cam and Company. You heard from Dr. Dennis Petruccelli, who was one of those testifying before the Virginia Crime Commission. Everytown for Gun Safety is actually trying to attack Republicans for doing that, instead of just, responding in knee-jerk fashion and passing all of the gun control bills that Ralph Northam wanted, none of which, by the way, Ralph Northam even acknowledges, none of which, had they been on the books, would have stopped that attack in Virginia Beach that prompted this special session. So, again, we're seeing gun control groups, they're not interested in having a real debate, a real discussion. They're interested in attacking any politician who doesn't go along with their anti-gun agenda. And they will use, I think, any attack possible, even if it is a misleading or deceptive attack. And the $135,000 that's being spent now, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Michael Bloomberg says he'll spend at least $2.5 million in the state of Virginia between now and Election Day in November. Gun owners are not going to be able to outspend gun control groups in the state of Virginia. Instead, we have to be involved, boots on the ground, grassroots activism, knocking on doors, talking to our fellow gun owners, our family, our friends. If you're an out-of-state gun owner and you are concerned by what's happening in Virginia because you know that it's likely if gun control activists get their way in Virginia in 2019, they're going to be coming to your state in 2020, there are ways for you to get involved as well. We'll be talking about that in the upcoming days and weeks, but this is a really, really critical issue. And I don't say that just because I live in the state of Virginia. If anti-gun activists get their way, Virginia, which has not passed a gun control law in 20 years and has seen our crime rates drop at the same time, we're going to start looking a lot more like New Jersey, California, New York in terms of our gun laws. And they're going to use that as a springboard, gun control activists will, to try to make your state look a lot like those states as well in 2020. So I mentioned California, right? Chuck Michel, president of the California Rifle and Pistol Association, sat down with me for a really in-depth discussion about some of the cases going on. We had a court hearing this week on the challenge to California's new ammunition sales law, which requires background checks every time somebody purchases ammunition. Requires that you cannot purchase ammunition online. If you're a California resident, you cannot purchase ammunition out of state and then bring it back into the state of California. It's absolutely crazy. And it sounds like this court hearing went pretty well, but we also talked with Chuck about a number of other issues, including right to carry cases, mag bans, and more. Take a look and a listen to our interview with California Rifle and Pistol Association President Chuck Michel. So let's get started here with what happened this week, right? We finally had a hearing regarding California's ammo sales law.
Right. We have been we've been working for months to oppose the regulations that they put in place about the ammunition background check law, as well as the statute itself, the law itself. And we finally got a hearing in San Diego U.S. District Court, federal court, on our request for an injunction this just past Monday. And so the judge is very interested in what we're saying, has not issued the injunction, at least as of yet, but is demanding that the DOJ explain why they're denying so many people. You know, in the month of July, they had 65,000 attempted ammunition purchases. They denied about 11,000 people. So this just points out, it underscores how messed up California's databases are. They think that these databases of who owns what guns, you know, registration databases and also the criminal records databases are current and accurate, but they're anything but. There's up to a 40% error rate in these databases. So when you put, you know, junk in, you get junk out. And so a lot of people are being wrongfully denied their Second Amendment right to purchase ammunition to use in their firearm.
Which, by the way, we kind of knew that was going to happen, right? I mean, there is a NICS denial rate, and a lot of those cases end up getting approved down the road because it's, you know, a matter of mistaken identity or something like that. So if this is already happening with firearm sales, it would stand to reason this was going to happen with ammunition sales.
Right, and we predicted this, and we told the DOJ, and then now are telling the court that there are much easier and less burdensome ways to do this. If you want to check on whether or not someone who purchased ammunition is prohibited from owning it, then, you know, if you collect their information at the time of purchase, and then send it to the police, which is what LA does now and Sacramento does now, they can then go see if those people are prohibited. And if they are, they can go pay them a visit. I'm not recommending that, but we're using that to show, to illustrate the point that you don't have to do this at the point of sale. This is also like firearms with NICS. They can approve the sale and then check the record after the fact and go visit the person. This is what DOJ does, and ATF does, if it turns out they're prohibited. But the state of California, and in particular Gavin Newsom, were interested in doing it that way because that wouldn't, you know, I believe that Newsom's motivation here is to try and make it as difficult as possible to own a firearm and to use a firearm, and making it difficult to buy ammunition and expensive is part of his plan, along with banning gun shows, gun ranges, gun stores. You know, he has said he wants to go after the gun culture. And to me, that means, you know, people who love freedom respect the Second Amendment. To him, I think that means the more we take away, the more gun owners we get out of circulation, the less people there are to oppose our plans to ultimately ban most, if not all, firearms from civilian possession.
I think that's exactly right. There's a researcher at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, Bloomberg School of Public Health, who I think her name is Sarah Cravasi. And she had a quote with Vox a couple of months ago where she actually talked about Massachusetts gun licensing laws. And she said, what we find is that with more of these burdens and barriers that we put in front of people, this doesn't stop violent criminals from, getting a gun license. They're already, again, they're not going to get one. But it prevents legal gun owners who have no intention whatsoever of ever misusing a firearm from exercising their rights because it's just too hard. It's too complicated. There's too much red tape that goes into exercising your right. And their idea is, you're right, fewer legal gun owners. You have, a smaller culture of lawful gun ownership, a smaller pool of individuals who are stepping up to defend their Second Amendment rights, and it makes it easier to impose all kinds of gun control laws going forward.
Sure, I'm glad that someone is finally admitting that on the gun ban lobby side, because I've suspected, and some folks have said, implied at least, that that's their plan. Gavin Newsom has been the most vocal and candid, frankly, about it of late in California. He's not always hiding behind the, this gun law will make us safer lie, because we know that these laws all fail to do anything about violent crime. But yeah, they're driving up the cost of firearms. They're driving up the cost of participating in the shooting sports. They're trying to shut down any opportunity to go shoot and experience the joy of shooting and the fun that's involved in that sport, So, yeah. And what's happening now is we're using the First Amendment to protect the Second Amendment. For example, in our gun show litigation out here, where they wanted to ban the use of public venues to hold a gun show. And so they were trying to do that in Del Mar. They were trying to do that in Costa. They were asked to do that in Costa Mesa. They were asked to do that in Ventura. And when they did do it in Del Mar, we sued them in federal court on the First Amendment grounds, because this is a public forum. There's no particular problems with the gun shows. The gun shows have less violence. At the Del Mar Fairgrounds, they've got horses dying on the racetrack. They've got kids dying from E. coli poisoning at the county fair. And they've got brawls at some of these concerts that they have at the venue. The gun show is nothing compared to them. That's not the real danger, but they want to blame everything on the gun show, and they want to make it impossible for people to congregate and learn about guns and buy a gun or buy an ammunition. Remember, in California, you don't walk out of a gun show with a gun. You've got to do a 10-day wait and pick it up later at the retailer. So we won in court on that one and stopped that law. And now we're in settlement discussions with them to pay for the damages that they caused by blocking a couple of shows and violating the rights of the show promoter and the attendees, the First Amendment rights in the process.
And that's important to note, because I know that gun owners both in California and around the country sometimes feel like California is a lost cause, and it's not. Yes, there is an anti-gun supermajority in the legislature, but thankfully what you all are showing with California Rifle and Pistol Association, these lawsuits supported by the NRA, is that you can take on these egregious unconstitutional laws and you can win. Going back to the ammo laws that you have right now, I'm sure you saw the story. This was probably 3 weeks, a month or so ago. Needles, California, declaring itself to be a Second Amendment sanctuary city. One of the problems, if you live in Needles, you could drive 5 miles into Arizona and you could go to a gun store and you could buy ammunition, except that's against the law as a California resident. So instead, you have to drive, 140 miles each way, right, to get legally purchased ammunition if you're a resident of one of these California border towns.
That's right. And we're working with Needles. They may actually join our lawsuit and become a plaintiff in our lawsuit. If not, at a minimum, they will be a friend of the court in our lawsuit. But that needle situation really underscores the lie that Newsom is telling here about the gun culture and trying to demonize the gun culture and equate the gun culture with gun violence. Gun culture is just somebody who appreciates the right to defend yourself or your family with a firearm, or likes to use a firearm for sport or target shooting or recreational shooting or hunting or whatever. But he is portraying them as, violent people. And the reality is, cities like Needles, rural towns like Needles and a bunch of others, they're the gun culture too. So he's really got a split in California. He really isn't representing the whole state. He's just representing LA County and the Bay Area, because that's where he can get his votes and, stay in office. And donors,
unfortunately,
too, which is very important.
Yeah, well, yeah, can't do anything without the donors there. So, tell me about this week's hearing. When do we expect a ruling by Judge Benitez?
Well, it's hard to say exactly, because the DOJ has got to explain to the court, produce evidence to show why they denied 11,000 people. By the way, out of those 11,000, the DOJ admits there was only 100 that were actually prohibited. And then they spin that as, we stopped, violent felons from getting guns. Well, no, wait a minute. There are almost 30 different ways that you can lose your rights to own a firearm in California. And most people, when they find themselves, actually I should say, they don't know that they're in the prohibited category. They are not given notice that some misdemeanor conviction they had or some ex-girlfriend went in and got a TRO. Those kinds of things are not necessarily told to the people who are prohibited. There's lots of people out there who are in these prohibited categories but could get out of them by simply filing the right form. And they don't know that. So most of these 100 sort of core denials have to be explained too, because I think they're spinning those as if they did something to, stop someone who's potentially violent from getting ammunition, which of course is also completely untrue, because anyone can get ammunition in so many other different ways besides walking into a retailer that you're not going to stop any crime with that either.
Yeah, but that's amazing. I mean, 11,000 denials. They say 100 of those denials were people who were prohibited by law from possessing ammunition. So 99% plus of the denials were erroneous?
Yeah. Were some kind of
Christmas.
name mismatch, or a database error, or the address didn't match up, or some kind of information that was provided didn't match up with the information in the state's database. And that's the point I'm trying to make. This is why the state of New York abandoned their plans to do ammunition background checks, because they finally calculated that trying to reconcile all these databases was going to cost them $100 million. Because that's what you have to do. You have to get a zero error database for firearm registrations and people's just information. I mean, we can't even keep our voter database cleaned up, our registered voter records, and our criminal records, our criminal history records are equally messed up. So unless they're going to spend the money to get these databases perfect, and I don't even know, no matter how much you spend, if you could ever really do that, because people,
right?
Unless this becomes like, show me your papers, and you have to keep your papers perfectly up to date all the time, or you're off to some kind of a incarceration camp. So that's the problem with this. They're never going to be able to get these databases squared away to the point that this ammunition purchase can be easy or even possible for many people. So we're confident that the judge is not going to put up with this. This is the same judge that we had for the magazine possession ban case, who wrote a glorious opinion about the right to have a magazine that holds over 10 rounds for self-defense. So we're pretty confident that he's paying attention, and he's not, like unfortunately so many judges in the Ninth Circuit and in district courts in California as well, philosophically and politically against the Second Amendment.
Speaking of the magazine ban case, where are we with that?
That's in the Ninth Circuit now on appeal.
Okay.
So that's just a matter of time. As it goes through the briefing process and then has oral argument, there probably won't be anything out of that for 6 months to a year. And in the meantime, we're not really in a huge hurry on that. Remember, people were able, in a 1 week period after that ruling came down, that decision came down, people bought 1 million magazines, 1 million 10-plus round magazines, legally in the state of California. So essentially, they stocked up. There was obviously a huge pent-up demand for those self-defense tools. And the ban on possessing magazines is still enjoined. It's still blocked. That was Newsom's Prop 63 law that, back in 2000, they told us we're going to ban acquisition and purchase of these, but anybody who has them is grandfathered in. So don't worry, we're not going to take your property. Well, naturally, this is what always happens. Whenever they can move, expand the law, they do. And so 10 years later, 20, 15 years later, the law was expanded by Prop 63 to not just ban people from buying new ones, but also to ban people from keeping the ones they've always had. And that possession ban is blocked by the district court. So all the magazines that people had and all the magazines that people bought during what's now being called Freedom Week, where they were able to go in and buy those magazines legally, they can keep while that is litigated. And while it's being litigated, the composition of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is being changed by the Trump administration, thank goodness. And we have the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, an NRA-supported case, in front of the United States Supreme Court. And if we get the good ruling that we expect on that, barring some, they're trying to maneuver out of that by claiming that the lawsuit is now moot because they've repealed the law in an effort to try and make the litigation irrelevant because the law doesn't exist anymore. So there's a sideshow fight going on about that. But assuming the Supreme Court, either through that case or another one, resets the standard of review, that's going to be a game changer because the Ninth Circuit and a number of other courts have essentially gone out of their way. They've bent over intellectually backwards to be so deferential to the legislature on any gun law that essentially it's almost impossible to strike anything down. So that obviously needs to change so that we get a fair trial, so to speak, and the Second Amendment has the teeth that the Founding Fathers intended it to have when it comes to infringement.
And speaking of that New York case, you're right that, we're seeing the city and even the state of New York try to moot this case. You've got 5 Democratic senators writing the Supreme Court in a front of the court brief, basically saying if you do agree to hear this case, it's just going to show how politicized the courts become, and we're going to have to restructure the court, meaning pack it full of anti-gun judges. It's shocking to me that you've got these gun control groups who are willing to defend this law right up until the point it gets to the Supreme Court, and then they desperately want to avoid the Supreme Court reviewing this case. But if the court does say, all right, look, this case is mooted, we're going to send this back down to the trial court or whatever, they've got Rogers versus Grewal right now that they're holding in conference. That's a right to carry case out of New Jersey. What are the earliest cases out of California or some of the cases that you're dealing with that could be queued up and be ready to be presented to the Supreme Court here very soon? Like what's the closest case to the Supreme Court right now?
Well, probably Flanagan, our CCW right to carry case, which was filed after the Ninth Circuit really worked hard to not recognize the right to carry in the Peruta case, and they mischaracterized the entire case and said there's no right to carry concealed, which is not a question we ever asked. We challenged the right to carry concealed or openly. Either way, you have to allow folks to carry one way or the other. And the court just basically dodged that question, so we immediately filed another lawsuit against LA County, and now that's on appeal as well. So that's another concealed carry case that's almost through the process in the Ninth Circuit and could go to the Supreme Court potentially next session, which begins in October.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we're waiting on a decision by the Ninth Circuit right now in Flanagan?
Right.
Have oral arguments already been held? We're just waiting for the decision to come down?
No, we're waiting on oral arguments.
Okay. Have those been scheduled yet?
No.
Okay. You're right. I mean, when you look at the Ninth Circuit and the jurisprudence involving right to carry, the court's kind of painted itself into a corner, right? I mean, it said in the Peruta case that no, you don't have a constitutional right to carry concealed. Then we saw the Young case out of Hawaii dealing with the open carry. And well, if you don't have a right to carry concealed, you've got the right to bear arms. So that must mean you've got the right to carry openly. The Flanagan case, again, you've got to have some right to bear arms somehow. It says so right there in the Second Amendment.
Right. And the Ninth Circuit is even. Go ahead.
No. Finish your thought.
The Ninth Circuit is even recognizing that New York that Supreme Court case could be a game changer, because I believe they've actually stayed a number of cases, and I just can't remember at the moment if they stayed Flanagan, because there was a recent ruling on this. But a number of these right to carry cases have been stayed in the Ninth Circuit, waiting for that New York State ruling, or that New York City ruling, I should say.
Interesting. Okay. Now, what about? I guess we'll ask for one last big topic. We're hearing a lot of folks call now for a ban nationwide on semi-automatic firearms. Beto O'Rourke wants to couple that with a mandatory quote-unquote buyback. I know that, California, it seems every couple of years they change their definition of what a quote-unquote assault weapon is, which leads to new litigation. So where are we in court right now in terms of challenging the current quote-unquote assault weapons ban in California?
Well, that's the Rupp case, and we just got a terribly ignorant decision from the district court judge that we got stuck with in that case. So that is now going to the Ninth Circuit as well. But
okay.
Yeah, as soon as they got rid of the bullet button, the magazine disconnect lock workaround that did what they claimed they wanted to do, would slow down reloading, which they claim is a problem, which, never mind that their underlying policy justifications for all of this are complete baloney. They now have, some of these judges have just gone so far as to, this judge actually held that there's no difference between an AR-15 and M16. So there's obviously a lot of ignorance. So it really is time for the Supreme Court to set things straight. But yeah, we also have another case challenging just the state regulations against where they've expanded the law and gone beyond what the statute really would have condemned as a quote unquote assault weapon under the new law. And now so many firearms are condemned as assault weapons that shouldn't be covered by the statute, and people who tried to register them were not able to because of database errors and data entry errors. The DOJ set up a website to register your firearm, then asked for far more information than the statute required, and then if it again didn't match up exactly, much like the ammo problem, they wouldn't accept your registration. So there's so many people who had firearms that they tried to register that then couldn't. So it's just we in the CRPA magazine that covers all these political affairs in California, we have a regular column called DOJ Snafu, because that's really what goes on at the DOJ Firearms Bureau. It's situation normal, all fouled up. They can't get it right. They all their regulatory all the regulations that they pass are politically inclined. They're not objective. They don't do what the statute says. They do what the DOJ can do to make firearms ownership more difficult, to condemn as many firearms from as many people and as many places as they possibly can. And that goes back to everybody, this is a rigged system out here. And the politicians want to make it as difficult as possible and at some point impossible to possess firearms.
That's why it's so important that the gun owners out there in California continue to fight every venue that you can. And Chuck, as always, sir, I appreciate you coming on the program for the update. We could talk to you another hour because I know we've only touched a few of the cases that you've got going on right now. Will you come back at some point soon?
I'd be happy to. Look, I want to do everything I can to make sure folks understand that the NRA and the CRPA, the California Rifle and Pistol Association, have been working together for decades challenging laws. I mean, this is just the most recent round that we're covering.
Yeah.
There's been challenges, some successful, and others that really have gotten us to this point where the Supreme Court's going to have to address it. For years and years and years, NRA spends far more money in California than they raise from California. Not far more, but more. And so whether you contribute to the CRPA Foundation or the NRA, ILA, or NRA Foundation, whatever, the money is being put to use. I do, my firm gives pretty generous nonprofit rates, so we're very frugal and very mindful of being efficient with those donor dollars, and we put them to good use. And we are fighting back, and we do have a lot of hope that the Supreme Court will set things straight, and we'll be able to launch a whole lot more lawsuits to get rid of some of California's ridiculous laws.
Well, fingers crossed. We'll find out early October if the court's going to actually hear this New York City case or if they're going to render it moot. So we've only got a few more weeks. Chuck Michel, president of the California Rifle and Pistol Association, civil rights attorney. Thank you as always for your time, sir, and look forward to doing this again soon. All right, I said at the top of the show that I didn't want to give you old headlines. Now, I did write about this for Bearing Arms on Thursday, but I'm still going to talk about it today because I didn't have a chance to talk about it on the show yesterday. We'll get to our good deed and we'll get to our criminal justice fail on Monday. Maybe I'll give you a double dose of each. But this one is such an incredible armed citizen story from Pasco County, Florida, where deputies are calling an armed neighbor who shot and killed a domestic violence suspect a hero. Not only did this guy end up shooting and killing this domestic violence suspect, who shot at him first, by the way, but this armed neighbor was able to protect the lives of children. So WXYZ reports that the Pasco County Sheriff's Office got a call Wednesday night about 7 p.m. stemming from a domestic violence attack. According to police, the domestic violence victim was inside the home screaming for help. Her neighbor, who was outside mowing his lawn, heard the screams over the lawnmower, by the way, which tells you how loud they are, ran over to help. As she's crying for help, she started moving a group of young children, police describe them as elementary school-age children, to the second-story window of the home. And the neighbor ended up reaching up and helping to pull these kids down to safety so that they could get out of the home. As the neighbor tried to de-escalate the situation, according to police, the domestic violence suspect took out a gun, pointed it at that neighbor. That neighbor was armed himself, and he fired back, killing the suspect on the scene. Police described the neighbor as a hero. As a matter of fact, the Pasco County Sheriff, Chris Nacco, described this armed neighbor as a hero. He said, quote, protecting somebody's life is a priority. Sheriff said the deputies found blood in the home, that the home was, quote, in disarray. They did not specify the severity of the domestic violence victim's injuries or if she was hurt or not. But again, were it not for that armed citizen. And can't you just hear the gun control activists tell you, like, why do you need to carry a gun to mow your yard? I don't know. Most of the time, you probably don't. But boy, I bet that domestic violence victim is sure glad that her neighbor was armed. Right? Again, this is such a scary situation. And if it weren't for that armed citizen being there in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, this situation could have unfolded very, very differently. We are so glad that that armed citizen is there. Hopefully we'll be able to bring you more information about that, gentleman. And again, we're just so glad and grateful that those kids are okay, that this domestic violence victim no longer has to suffer that abuse, that her attacker is no longer with us, and hopefully a new, better chapter of her life and the lives of those kids begins today. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thank you again for being a part of the program as always. You can find us, if you like the podcast version, better than staring at this ugly mug, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, townhall.com podcast page as well. If you just can't get enough of this luxurious beard, I know it's not the face, it's got to be the beard. You can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube, and you can get the visual version of the show each and every day. Thank you again for watching. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.